All right. Hello, everyone. It's Rayos the Hermit, broadcasting live from my Hermit Cove. And we're here for the second part of my little series. I lost my job, so now I'm finally working through my YouTube watch later list. So, at least when there's anyone here, so I'll just jump right in with why Gen Z misses a time they never knew. I guess for YouTube, I should probably. Let me. A little loud, so I'm gonna turn it down a bit. And turn on the audio capture. Don't wanna. Oop. Oh, rich man, yeah, you're here. Oh, the Roz dropped for 100 girlfriends. Nice. Yeah, I'll have to watch, or at least I'll have to stop by Backtrack React stream to give a like, maybe a cheeky comment, and be on my way. Yeah. How you doing, man? It's it's morning for you. I'm sure, like it's morning for me, but yeah. I only got out of bed like 15 minutes ago just to get ready for the stream. But anyway, yeah. We are starting off our little watch or react thing with why Gen Z misses a time they never knew, for people who can't see that behind my body. Yep.
Why does this look familiar? Is this a real place? Did you dream this? Did we
Yeah.
all?
It's my morning
dream
voice.
this?
Yeah.
In the last few years, there has been an explosive interest in images like these. Why is this? What are these images? And why are they as comforting as they are unnerving? We haven't been there, but these places feel hauntingly familiar. It's a memory we have, but it is a memory that is not ours. Anemoia is the nostalgia for a time one has never known. It is a powerful and strange emotion. For Gen Z, anemoia often manifests as a deep yearning for the late 20th century. Despite not having consciously lived through it, many feel a sense of loss for that era. This sensation is beyond just aesthetics and cultural trends. It touches on something existential. Looking in the rearview mirror of history, the late 80s and the 90s feel like a more optimistic time. The United States seemed to be at a cultural and economic high point. There was a collective sense that the future was bright and that humanity was progressing in a meaningful way. It's a cringe cliche to say life was better back in my day. I had a real childhood. But we're not even talking about childhoods. We're talking about something that precedes that. The romanticization of the decade before one's birth is common across generations. It's when the world feels magical before reality sets in. As someone born in the late 90s, I can most accurately speak for Gen Z. Those who have actually lived through the decades of the 80s and 90s may very well say that those who have never lived through these decades will put this era on a pedestal. The idea of the 80s and 90s offers a kind of imagined sanctuary before the algorithms started to shape our every thought. It's a vision of analog warmth, human connection, mall culture, and the final chapters of a linear reality. This is reflective of our obsession with images of liminal spaces. They evoke this sense of suspended time. They're not just eerie or dreamlike, they reflect a world on the cusp of fading. Liminal spaces capture a tension between memory, possibility, and loss. These are spaces like empty school hallways after hours, shopping malls in decline, dimly lit office corridors, vacant arcades, and hotels with endless carpeted hallways. They're not designed to be destinations, they're passages, places you pass through on the way to somewhere else. Yet when frozen in time, devoid of people, they feel strangely sacred. They become vessels for projection, a template for what once was and what could have been. What makes these spaces especially vivid for Gen Z is their layered familiarity. Many of these environments were not designed during their lifetime, but were still around during their formative years. A mall built in the late 80s, still operating in the early 2000s, carried the echoes of a different cultural energy. Even as children, Gen Z could sense they were experiencing the fading afterglow of something bigger, something
Okay, I'm waiting for a good time to pause and step in, but I don't think that's probably not going to happen. I mean, this is definitely great editing. I can tell that right away. But I mean, as a late Gen Zer myself, 97 baby. I mean, I've personally never been a super nostalgic person, so some of what he's saying I can't super relate to. Uh, I can't say I ever remember feeling a sense of how do you phrase it?
Were not designed during their lifetime, but were still around during their formative years. A mall built in the late 80s, still operating in the early 2000s, carried the echoes of a different cultural energy. Even as children, Gen Z could sense they were experiencing the fading afterglow of something bigger, something
I never got that impression, but then again, I've always been in both good and bad ways, a very self-centered person, very much focused on me and trying to make my own way without worrying about other people. So I mean, I can definitely see why I wouldn't have noticed that sort of thing. But then again, I also grew up in a pretty decent like I don't know, like lower upper class, upper middle, upper lower class, uh, like household until obviously until the 2008 recession, and then things got a little bit less middle class and a little more lower class, but yeah.
Already slipping away. The food courts, the fluorescent lighting, the sun-bleached promotional posters, all of it felt like it belonged to an older world, one with different dreams. There is an inherited memory. These spaces evoke both personal nostalgia and cultural nostalgia. We sense that generations before us once found meaning, purpose, and joy in these spaces. That collective memory seeps into our own experience, and we feel haunted by the absence of life that should be there. The silence of a mall is not eerie just because it's quiet. It's eerie because we know it used to be loud with talking and movement. There should be people in those places, but there is not. Gen Z grew up during the slow decay of these spaces. They watched the old world glitch, pixelate, and disappear. First in malls, then in media, then in human connection itself. What's left behind are these hollow corridors, still standing but directionless. They feel like a metaphor for growing up in a time of...
Hey, Thelonious. Yep. And Moonlight just released his latest chapter release, so good now. Yeah. In Richmond, stuck in middle lower class hell because parents didn't use a freaking condom. Damn. My condolences. But it seemed to... I mean, I won't speak too much for your life, but you seem to be enjoying yourself. So yeah, that's always the silver lining there, I guess.
Of transition, where the promises of the past no longer apply and the future is undefined. The vaporwave aesthetic evokes a paradox that resonated deeply with the new generation. It is both a critique and a longing for the late 20th century consumer culture. It is both a satire and an admiration for this era. The pastel colors, glitchy visuals, and slowed down elevator music draw from a time when malls were vibrant templates of commerce, technology felt wondrous, and globalization was still a dream full of promise. Gen Z only experienced these eras secondhand, through old media, photos, and cultural remnants. Vaporwave represents a version of capitalism where optimism still existed, but Vaporwave literally distorts the past. The warped sounds, melting visuals, and artificial nostalgia create a surreal, almost haunted feeling. It's not a pure celebration of the past, but a recognition of its hollowness and eventual decay. The consumer utopias of yesterday are now abandoned spaces. Vaporwave, in its own way, is a liminal space. It exists in the in-between, between memory and imagination, between critique and desire, between past promises and present realities. Like all liminal spaces, it is unsettling and beautiful.
You have two siblings. Okay, yeah. I imagine that might have made it, a lower middle class household, probably a bit more difficult to grow up in. I mean, I have a younger brother by 3 years, but I mean, I don't think that really made. I don't think that made it more difficult for us. I mean, but it did mean like we had to get two Game Boys or two PSPs or something like that. But I mean, I guess the fact that my family parents were able to buy those sorts of things kind of spoke to where we were financially, at least until 2008. Then, when that happened, it's a good thing the internet was around, because otherwise we would not have been able to afford really any entertainment other than, I guess, buying new games for the consoles that we already had. But then we wouldn't. It was only difficult getting new consoles. I remember how difficult it was to get a freaking like Xbox 360. That was like a saving up sort of thing. Like we had to really save up our allowance and be very austere about it. Otherwise, it was not possible. But I don't know. I'm sure for people who live through actual poverty, that sounds very utopian. But when you're a kid, that's all you know. But
Comforting yet eerie, Vaporwave floats in a dreamlike suspension, inviting Gen Z to mourn what never fully was, while simultaneously questioning what could have been. It invites us to dig deep and look at our earliest memories. As a young child, my family moved houses a couple times. I remember going on tours of these clean houses that were often empty. Houses were not supposed to be empty, and that is what made them interesting and satisfying. They were liminal spaces. I remember being amazed at these very clean, empty places. I scoped out where my room could be, and what life would be like in a new place and in a new community. The liminal space of these new houses represent potential. Life seemed exciting. When we're young, the world is still being written, and places like empty houses represent a world of possibilities. The emptiness was full of a sacred potential energy. For children, potential feels infinite. These empty homes were liminal spaces because they symbolized a transition in life,
crazy
a new
potentiality,
chapter, a new identity, a new set of routine.
A lot less common in adulthood. I mean, I still feel it occasionally. I can tell it's fundamentally different from when you're a child and you really, really do not know what the limits and the what's plausible and implausible. Everything feels possible, for better or worse. Like that shadow at the end of the hallway could just as easily be a monster as it could just be a tree outside the window, kind of thing. But
and rituals. I wasn't just moving houses, I was moving selves. These experiences remind us of moments when the future felt full of promise. They stir up memories of times when life was unfolding, when the next step was unknown yet thrilling. And for children, those moments root deeply in the psyche. They become part of your programming. Technology in the late 1990s and early 2000s was making a lot of noise. It whirred, it clicked, it loaded. It was physical and imperfect and full of wonder. It had character. Instead of scrolling endlessly, you simply waited. In the waiting, there was a sense that something new was being born. Something was loading in both the machine and in the world. For Gen Z, coming of age during this era meant watching technology grow with them. Gadgets were something external to us. They were portals. The internet wasn't yet a mirror reflecting ourselves back and filtering.
You thought the chemtrails were a meteorite? Yep. I've talked about this before on my partner channel, I guess, with Red Alexander from Chaos Square. But yeah, when I was a kid, I would see like the condensation trails of airplanes, and after having just watched a Nat Geo documentary about what would happen if a meteor struck the Earth, I was like, oh my god. Every airplane condensation trail was a meteorite in my mind. I was like, oh god, we're gonna die. It's over, bro. It's over. Game over. But yeah, that's the kind of possibility. Now, for me, I think I was definitely a very what's the word? I guess morbid kid. I mean, I loved and was terrified by scary sort of things. Like cryptid sort of stuff, like paranormal stuff. Like the Travel Channel had lots of programming about spooky, haunted like I guess hotels and other sorts of places, like Winchester Mystery House type places. I love watching shit like that, even though it scared the hell out of me because I don't know, there's just so much like that potential of like maybe it's real, maybe it's not. I mean that was very enthralling for me, I guess.
Filtered fragments. It was a frontier. Every glowing screen felt like a door to a bigger world. There was magic in the machine. The future still had an aesthetic. Websites were cluttered but colorful. Interfaces had soul. There were error sounds, loading animations, clip art mascots, and startup jingles. Technology was quirky. It was human in its limitations, but it felt inviting, not invasive. This aligns with Gen Z's earliest identity, children full of curiosity and promise, growing with a world still optimistic about what tech could do. Both the youth and the digital world around them were full of potential, unscripted, and not yet optimized or monetized. You did not have to be useful online, you could just explore. As this generation grew older, so did technology. The change may have only appeared to get better. The devices got sleeker, but the culture grew harsher. The interfaces got smarter, but the human experience started to feel dumber. The internet stopped being a world and became a feed. That magic gave way to metrics. Eventually, we weren't using technology. The technology was using us. Maybe this is why so many people in Gen Z feel a nostalgia for an old operating system, because they feel nostalgia for an old sense of self. A self that still believed. A self that saw technology not as surveillance, but as opportunity. Not as artificial intelligence, but as authentic wonder. Though we live in a time of unprecedented technological power, many people seem to understand less about how it actually works. What was once a tool to be tinkered with has now become a seamless black box service. I know this all sounds like those baby boomer cringe and cliche phone bad memes, but this is exactly the reason those memes exist. This is exactly the reason people use technology to ironically create and distribute content on how technology is bad. But it's not.
I mean, to be fair, I often feel like that's kind of scapegoating the actual issues, by how to phrase it. I'm oftentimes asking myself, are people saying these things because it's in fashion to say, because it's like actually the truth? And I mean, there's a part of me it's while I'm watching this video, I'm like, this guy seems to do a lot of stream of consciousness and like style stuff. I'm sure if you already relate to and you believe in what he's saying, his video must seem very compelling and riveting. But someone who doesn't relate to a lot of stuff, I've never been a very nostalgic person. I'm still kind of like waiting for like the actual point, I guess you could say. But for him to like, what's the word? For him to like really like explore and like sort of substantiate his thesis. Like honestly, I like if I had to summarize what the video is about, it just seems to be about what's the word, like just kind of just repeating stuff that people already believe. Like I mean, really, he summed it up perfectly. It kind of just feels like modern bad, and then applause. Actually, how many views is? Oh, yeah, 3 months at like 300,000 views. Like I mean, it does so far does feel a lot like the epitome of this meme, but.
This is exactly the reason people use technology to ironically create and distribute content on how technology is bad. But it's not that technology is necessarily bad. It's just so different from the way we once envisioned it could be. Gen Z occupies a unique in-between space. They were the last generation to grow up with the internet rather than in the internet. They watched technology evolve from something mechanical and hands-on to something invisible and cloud-based. They were once digital natives and digital mechanics. When my family first got DSL internet, it was absolutely mind-blowing. This was the first time I realized the internet could do more than just email. My family gathered around the desktop computer daily, similar to how a family of the 1800s may have gotten a wagon and set out together for the Oregon Trail. My family journeyed together to explore the internet, and we would check out videos on there, which was the treasure. This was before we even heard of YouTube. We watched a lot of stupid videos. The website we watched was literally called Stupid Videos. I'm not sure this website offered any enrichment to our lives. These videos were either just cats acting sporadic or monkeys urinating in their own.
Okay, well, okay. Ignoring that second one, the first one, yeah, cats are obviously like enriching. There's no like that requires no evidence. Like,
own mouths. However, we did pull the couch up to the desktop computer, and the couch did stay there. The television had been replaced. We knew this was not the same internet of the 90s. We knew technology would never be the same. This is something Gen Alpha never experienced. Gen Alpha is growing up in this sealed-off ecosystem through smartphones, tablets, and AI assistants. It's designed to feel like magic instead of machines. Apps are interfaces, not tools. Cloud storage replaces file management. Updates happen silently in the background. As a result, many of them don't see technology as something to understand. They see technology as something to use, because that's what technology offers them. This is not something bad. This is just something a lot more different than what we thought it would be, as is life. Yet, this shift marks the loss of a certain kind of creativity, a kind of this is just something that's what technology offers. As a result, many of them don't see technology as something to understand. They see technology as something to use, because that's what technology offers them. This is not something bad. This is just something a lot more different than what we thought it would be, as is life. Yet, this shift marks the loss of a certain kind of creativity, a kind of digital craftsmanship that Gen Z just inherited from the world of the 90s. And it's part of why that era now feels so deeply nostalgic. The 90s were the last time technology felt knowable. You could open a computer tower and see the wires. You could blow into a game cartridge and make it work. There was a spirit of learning through trial and error. The future did not feel like a polished, manipulative algorithm. It just felt playful. Technology was a front.
oh, two things I didn't see your previous comment in this one. Yeah, you're asking well, initially you're asking what our favorite card games are. You said yours was Uno. Honestly, I can't remember any of the card games other than Uno. I mean, I have played that and definitely enjoyed it when we played it, but and then now you're asking about favorite type of video game or type of food. I mean, to here, I haven't played video games for a while. It's been a very, very long time. I mean, in terms of Let's Plays, I do tend to enjoy visual novel type things. I would also consider Persona series to be within the visual novel space, even if it's, it does have normal gameplay elements included. But I mean, I do love games like that. But yeah, food-wise, I mean, historically, I've been a very picky eater, but I don't know, I do like meat, like pork chops, ribs, maybe even the occasional chicken, if I'm feeling cheeky. But yeah.
Frontier that always invited you to create. That's part of why so many romanticize this time. It was a moment when humanity and technology felt like they were learning together. The nostalgia was for a time where you could understand the world that was being built around you, and believe you had a role in building it too. Entertainment of the late 20th century almost feels bigger today than it felt back then. The fascination with the sitcoms of this time is more than just jokes and characters. It's about the world they offered, a world that now feels impossibly distant. When we watch these shows, we're stepping into a parallel universe where adulthood looked attainable, community was built into everyday life, and problems could be resolved in 22 minutes. There's a deeply comforting simplicity in that. The storylines were rarely heavy. The characters were endearingly flawed. Conflict never spiraled into chaos. It was digestible and silly, and always wrapped up neatly with jokes and morals. These shows did not demand cynicism from their viewers. They offered warmth, rhythm, and routine. Life was chaotic outside the screen, but sitcoms gave us structure. A living room, a diner, an oversized apartment, a workplace where everyone somehow got along. They gave us hope. Part of the fascination lies in what these shows implied about the world. It was possible to have independence, stability, and a close friend group without constant burnout. In the shows Friends and Seinfeld, young adults lived in spacious New York City apartments while working entry-level or inconsistent jobs. This setup was often mocked as unrealistic, yet it reflected a version of 1990s idealism rooted in possibility.
Ooh, Subnautica is one of your favorite games of all time, Richmond. I've never played it, but I don't think I've ever even watched a full playthrough of the game. But I mean, it does seem entertaining. Yeah.
Even if exaggerated, the notion that you could move to a big city, chase your dreams, and still afford rent spoke to a time when upward mobility and personal freedom felt within reach. These shows embodied the optimism of the era. The belief that independence, friendship, and self-discovery were not only desirable, but economically feasible. Today, that same setup feels like a fantasy. In The Simpsons, Homer's ability to support a family of 5 on a single income with only a high school diploma reflects a bygone era of economic stability and upward mobility for the American working class. While exaggerated for comedy, the show tapped into a very real 1990s idealism, where a simple, middle-class life was seen as attainable and secure. The series functioned as both a satire and a time capsule, parodying suburban life while simultaneously capturing its core.
I should play it. Maybe I will. Now that I'm doing a content Andy, maybe I'll add gameplay to the pipeline. I don't know.
Aspirations. I am saying nothing unique in this observation, but the reason modern Simpsons now feels like a zombie is because it's a premise that just simply does not work in a post-1990s society. These shows weren't meant to be completely unrealistic fantasy. These were ridiculous comedies that were still intended to feel relatively grounded. They were at least somewhat believable at the time. That's what makes them feel tragic in retrospect. Coming of age in a time where housing is unaffordable and wages stagnate, these sitcoms truly feel like relics of a lost civilization. They show a version of America where the future seemed open, where social bonds did not depend on algorithms, and laughter wasn't canned, it was communal. People used to watch shows together. A lot of people would tune in at the same time to watch the same thing. Watching TV has always been a waste of time, but we used to waste time together. The laugh track itself is symbolic. Today it is outdated and artificial, but back then it reinforced the idea of togetherness. It told you, you're not alone. Others are watching too. Others are laughing. You belong to something. Compare that to the detached, ironic tone of many modern shows, which reflect the despair and nihilism of our time. In the late 20th century, even when things went wrong, there was still a belief that things would work out. Watching these shows now is seeking a template for when life felt full of promise. In The Matrix, the simulated world is set in the year 1999 because that was described as the peak of human civilization. Now, this was likely a convenient plot device at the time, but in hindsight, it unironically lands with eerie resonance. What may have started as a fictional justification for the film's aesthetics now feels like an accurate cultural prophecy. As time has passed, more and more people look back at 1999 as a symbolic summit, the last moment when the modern world felt hopeful, coherent, and human. 1999 was
Samantha is a pretty fun game to watch. If I was in that situation in real life, I'd be terrified. I've not heard of that game. Let me do a quick little look-see up. Okay, well, there's several games with the Samantha title, but I'll take your word for it. Yeah.
The threshold between two centuries. America felt dominant, but not yet hollowed out by endless wars or corporate monopolies. There was anxiety about the upcoming millennium, but even that anxiety was more a result of anticipation instead of despair. It was a moment suspended in potential. The world was analog enough to feel real, yet digital enough to feel new. Consumerism was rising, but hadn't yet blurred into the meaning of life. The idea of a future still felt open-ended and vaguely utopian. 1999 symbolizes the last cultural breath before this culture passed away. After this year, there was an undoubtable downward spiral. Terrorism, war, economic collapse, the rise of social media, the erosion of privacy, and political polarization. Something in civilization clearly shifted. Many people have spent the decades since reaching back, trying to remember what it felt like when things made sense. The death of the 1980s and 1990s idealism feels like a slow unraveling, one that began as the millennium turned and accelerated with the shocks of the early 2000s. The 1990s were a rare cultural moment, a mix of economic opportunities, technological novelty, and a relative global stability. That optimism was fragile.
Why they pull in like that?
The world was progressing linearly toward more peace, prosperity, and possibility. When did this idealism die? Y2K was the first symbolic crack of the dying dream. As the year 2000 approached, people were scared. The fear that the clocks might stop and systems might fail reflected an underlying anxiety about our reliance on technology and whether that reliance was sustainable. It was a moment when the future, once imagined as bright and certain, suddenly seemed vulnerable and uncertain. The gleaming digital optimism of the 90s clashed with a mechanical flaw lurking beneath. The so-called Y2K bug threatened to bring global infrastructure to a halt. Nearly every system and process was suspected to be vulnerable. It was as though humanity had constructed a digital skyscraper, only to discover that it had been built on a cracked foundation. We feared for the code we had written. The code was our narrative. The code was our prophecy. What made this moment so uniquely unsettling was the realization of how entangled our lives had become in these invisible systems. For years, we had celebrated the rise of the internet, the growth of global networks, the power of automation and instant communication. But the Y2K scare forced a collective reckoning. What if the Great Leap Forward introduced a kind of fragility? What if the systems we trusted to organize, measure, and protect our lives could fail just from a simple lack of foresight? The anxiety surrounding Y2K was existential. Beneath the surface-level panic of crashing planes and failing ATMs prone to a deeper question. Had we advanced too quickly, building tools faster than we could understand their consequences? Had we become too dependent on these tools to function without them? Of course, there was no Y2K bug disaster.
Wait a minute. It's New Year's Eve 1999. What the hell are you people doing watching this crap?
Countless hours of programming and preparation paid off, and the world efficiently stepped into a new millennium. But the lesson...
I'm chilling in a second about some digital mascots kind of cool, some are creepy. You know, I can't think of any specifically digital mascots off the top of my head, but definitely, obviously, I mean, we kind of live in the era of so-called mascot horror, which I honestly is kind of a building off of a lot of stuff. Mr. What is his name of his channel? Yeah, building off a lot of the things that Mr. Philosophes is speaking about in terms of turning what for a lot of people, my age and possibly your age, were like usually fun mascots like Chuck E. Cheese is and other things into horrifying abominations, basically like that Poppy's Playtime is a recent very popular example. Obviously there's the one whose name I can't remember, but it was big on game theorists. Recently got his own movie. Has lots and lots of interesting fan art online. But yeah. I mean, they have those mascots, or rather mascots in general. They do kind of have similar. They occupy kind of similar spaces. Things like clowns, uncannily realistic dolls, where for some reason adults think kids like those things. A lot of kids do, but some kids also hate them, and that playing on that fear, especially once we become adults, is definitely incredibly popular.
Lingered. Y2K was a reminder. We realized the future was something we had to build carefully, with caution and responsibility. So maybe the idealism died shortly after. September 11th, 2001 delivered the seismic rupture, a violent, unmistakable shattering of the era's optimism. It wasn't just the scale of the attacks or the tragedy they brought, it was what they symbolized. The sense of invincibility, the belief in unshakable...
Now I will I guess say that even though I was like 4 years old when it happened, I do not remember 9/11 at all. I'm not sure if that's just because I was shielded from it, or if I just wasn't, or if that self-centeredness I mentioned earlier was so strong. Even back then, I was like, that's got nothing to do with me. It's happening on the TV on the other side of the country. Even but yeah, I don't have that experience of living in a world before 9/11 and living in a world after. Living in a world after it. From my point of view, it's always been like this. So maybe that explains some of my feelings that I've mentioned and will be getting into at the end of the video. But yeah, you went to you went to Chuck E. Cheese's once. The place was pretty fun, except I found the mascots to be pretty creepy after hearing one voice line from the animatronics. You never went back. Yeah. We went there pretty often since it was close enough. Where we lived, it was easy to stop by there on like a grocery run or something like that. But yeah, I was one of the kids. I never really found them to be creepy. I just thought they were fun animatronic toys. Sometimes they were, what's the word? Man puppets. I think that's a word where they were puppeted by a person in them. So, I had a birthday there, so I don't know. I'm not one of those people who relates to, at least as a kid, seeing mascots is inherently terrifying. Yeah.
The assumption that the United States was the moral and cultural beacon. These were all thrown into question in a single morning. In the smoke and ashes of the Twin Towers, something else fell. The illusion of stability. The American dream, which was already fraying at the edges, now felt haunted by vulnerability. The idea that liberal democracy and global capitalism would inevitably lead to peace and prosperity suddenly came into question. The playfulness and consumerist excess of the 90s gave way to a new era of fear, suspicion, and moral ambiguity. This era forced us to face uncomfortable questions. What have we become? What does freedom truly mean? In hindsight, the 90s kind of feel like the last gasp of cultural innocence. A time when the internet still felt like a playground, when globalization was sold as a solution, and the future still sparkled with promise. But after 9/11, the shine dimmed. Security replaced openness. Certainty gave way to confusion. Even the line between good and evil became blurry. If Y2K was the crack, 9/11 was the shattering. And from that point on, we were no longer living in the future we thought would happen. For Gen Z, this feels like a loss that was inherited rather than experienced. They missed the unfiltered hope of the 80s and 90s, the belief in endless progress, in technology as a benevolent force, in a world where economic security was guaranteed for many. Instead, they grew up in a world shaped by the aftermath. Endless wars, the 2008 financial crash, the rise of social media, the societal response to the pandemic, etc. This created a sense of missing out on something that felt bigger than nostalgia. It was about missing the cultural moment when the future seemed truly open, where adulthood was a path paved with possibility. It's called the American Dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. George Carlin. Gen Z's longing for the late 20th century is a longing for a world where optimism was the default mode, where people could believe in institutions, communities, and a better tomorrow. They weren't wrong to feel like they missed out, because that version of the world objectively is gone, and subjectively replaced
sometimes
by complexity,
buying
ambiguity, and
sometimes buying a carton of milk and a loaf of bread does feel like a financially irresponsible decision, but yeah.
Certainty. And it doesn't end there. Future generations will idealize and romanticize this current time we're living in right now. One of my biggest privileges in life is that I finished college and entered the workforce before the year 2020. I got all of my education in person and before the use of mainstream AI. The year 2020 will not be remembered as a crisis of physical health. It will be remembered as a global psychic fracture. Life reshaped. The way we work, the way we learn, the way we socialize, all of it was disrupted, and much of it was never fully rebuilt. The collective sense of momentum that guided earlier generations was destroyed. Remote work and remote school may have offered convenience, but they also stripped away presence, ritual, and belonging. The year 2020 was a major cultural shift that seemed to zombify a lot of people. Though a lot of things reverted back to normal, it seems some people got trapped in the year 2020. They are still living in it, and they will never leave it. It's as if the pandemic froze development, curiosity, and initiative. This year had irreversible damage to children, and I fully cannot grasp the weight of this. So many children started school on Zoom. So many children were babysat by tablets. Because of that, this next generation will feel a yearning for a time they never knew. The time of Gen Z. Those who had childhoods in a pre-2020 world. They'll scroll through archived TikToks, watch YouTube vlogs from 2016, see photos of events packed with people socializing, and they'll ask themselves, what did it feel like to grow up then? This will be their anemoia. They will long for what our world represented. Some level of established connection, normalcy, shared physical space. Even the chaos and noise of pre-2020 life will feel like warmth compared to the sterile, algorithmic sanitarium they know. Anemoia isn't just a gaze into the past, it's a commentary on the present. When reality feels unstable, disconnected, or hollow, we project our yearning onto the imagined stability of back then. If every generation is doomed to mourn the last one's vitality, maybe it's time to start recognizing the sacredness of the present while it's happening. We seem to never truly understand what we have before it's too late. And so, it is a privilege to have the clarity
read your head now.
to look at that time
Thank you for
and
stopping by.
remember it,
Yeah.
honor it, and
Yep.
carry its humanity into whatever future comes next.
All right. Okay. Oh, until yeah, you said I could never understand why Barney the Dinosaur was a show marketed towards kids. it was nightmare fuel. Same with Teletubbies and JJ the Jet Plane. And I don't recognize JJ the Jet Plane, but I do remember Teletubbies. I mean, honestly, a lot of stuff kind of bored me as a kid. I wasn't really super into it. But as for the video, I mean, you can see from my notes some of my thoughts. I mean, honestly, a lot of it just seemed kind of like, end stage capitalism, isn't it? Like, I don't know, a lot of these things are. I mean, part of it, I question here, like, are some of these like, is this reflection of like real larger societal issues, or are these just the feelings that all generations have as they grow up and stop being children and lose their innocence and have to start being responsible for taking care of not only themselves but kind of like the world around them, because we're no longer kids anymore. We don't have the adults in our life taking on all that work for us. Now we have to also participate in that sort of thing. And I mean, that part by itself is already going to naturally create nostalgia in a lot of people for their actual lived experience of being a child. Then on top of that, then we have the actual societal the actual societal changes of late stage capitalism causing people to not be able to take care of themselves and their environment because we don't have the resources. We don't have like the money and wealth. I mean, the joke about freaking bread and a carton of milk being a financially, like, you gotta file bankruptcy after that. And that really kind of says it all, kind of thing. But I mean, definitely. The 90s definitely were. I mean, even if I personally consider the nostalgia a lot of people have for it to be, overblown and kind of just kind of delusional almost. I mean, we had the freaking I think political scientist Fukuyama talking about how in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, that we were now at essentially the end of history in the sense that everything interesting, it kind of already happened. Like capitalism won, communism lost, and now it was just now it's kind of just a happily ever after, and there would never be anything like the rest of history. The rest of history would just be trivia essentially, and it's like. I mean, people rack on a guy for their misunderstood interpretation of what he said, what he was saying. But I mean, even the correct interpretation of his end of history is still kind of worthy of ridicule, because it's like, I mean, despite what Mr. Philosophes was saying, where like it felt where everything was all warm and fuzzies. I mean, like I think for a lot of people who were, like for a lot of people who weren't Westerners, for example, or who weren't part of the, I'll say for a lot of people who weren't white, it was, even the 90s were not great. I mean, they were better. I mean, like I won't pretend like the Civil Rights Act happening in the 60s and the, sort of kicking off several decades of social progress and equality. I won't pretend that didn't improve people's lives, but I mean, there were still things like the Rodney King beating that resulted in quite a few riots. Like not. I mean, I don't know how it compared to the George Floyd protest that happened in 2020, which Mr. Philosophes did not mention. I mean, maybe he showed footage from that time. I don't remember everything that I saw in that last segment about the dream. But I mean, when I see things like, I hear things like this, I'm always thinking like, okay, I mean, like, was it? I mean, was it really great for everyone, or was it just great for you? Kind of thing. Like, how do you how do you know the difference between that? And I mean, he never really interrogated that aspect of all this. Like he kind of just took it for granted that these feelings were either valid or universal, and it's like, no, they're not. They're definitely not universal, and whether they're valid or not is something worthy of discussion. Like, like the idea of technology being something to use, not to understand. I mean, I was also someone who grew up in a similar setting that he described, where people often describe it as the computer. It was a room. There was a computer room, and you would do stuff in order to do stuff online, or even just, I mean, not necessarily online. Even just to do stuff on an electronic device, you had to go to the computer room. Whereas nowadays, we have our phones, which we tend to carry with us, like basically at all times, and something we can use at all times as a result. But yeah. Getting to my personal experience, I definitely remember, tinkering and fiddling with computers, taking them apart, putting them back together, because it was the family computer. So if you're going to take it apart, you got to put it back together. Otherwise, mom and dad, who were actually using it for stuff, they're going to be pissed. But I mean, I don't know. Like for me, while I did just describe something that sounds a lot like understanding the computer, right? It was partly partly a natural child curiosity. I was treating, for me, I was definitely relating to technology and the computer as more something to use. Because I mean, I mentioned before that I was writing from a very young age, and I mean, I was using the computer mostly to write. I was using Word, Microsoft Word primarily. I mean, that definitely for me it was ultimately a thing to use. Maybe I'm being a little too contrarian. I mean, that is an issue. I guess I have. I can definitely be contrarian for the sake of it. But ultimately he touches on a lot of things that people have gone into, like things like the atomization of the individual, like the erosion of third spaces in the form of like malls and like the little like libraries that just libraries. Because I was gonna say libraries. We were when we were kids, we might be left at a library as as daycare sort of thing. But I mean, even as an adult, I don't know if I would even go to the library, because I mean, why do that when I can look up 99.9% of everything I need on Google, for example. But also touching on things like the erosion of trust in the system and the institutions. I mean, again, it felt like he was just kind of like scratching the surface of a lot of these things. Where it's like, I mean, you really could have gone into more about that. I mean, that for example is not really. I mean, you mentioned things like how like in the wake of 2001 and the surveillance state really kicking in the gear that he mentioned the causation of how that resulted in loss of trust in the system. But I definitely would have preferred more focus on causation, because I mean a lot of it really just felt like, well, preaching to the choir, like I mentioned the walk up to the stage, say iPhone bad, and then lean back as applause, as a thunderous applause, fill the room kind of thing. But definitely a very well edited video. I mean, I noticed and definitely appreciated how the glitchy aesthetic they use, and obviously the music choices that they made really contributed to creating the effect they were going for. I'm sure for people who really do feel nostalgic about these things, it must have really really like heightened and pushed that feeling of nostalgia to the max, kind of thing. So, I mean, as an artiste, I can definitely appreciate things from that perspective. But I think that's it for my notes. I don't really have much else to say, so we can move on to our next video. All right.
This video is sponsored by Brilliant. More about this video is sponsored by
All right. Anyway. So yeah, this video is about anti-portals, which is, I mean, obviously based on the thumbnail, it looks like an inversion of a portal. But I don't know much about that. Never heard of that. But yeah, we will be learning some, I guess, probably physics, mathematics type stuff. But yeah, let's get into that.
This video is sponsored by Brilliant. More about it later. In this video, we will look at how regular, normal-sized portals can create infinite recursive space. We will use them to create really beautiful structures. Then I'll explain how it works, and then represent them as teleportation surfaces. And at the end, we will even understand a bit of portal topology. In the last video, many of you asked me to make the camera visible. I've added it. This is the camera, or you could say it's you, the viewer. You will see it in the main scenes, but not in all of them, since I have to program it differently for each scene. So I hope you will cut me some slack here.
All right. Yeah. First things first. Regarding the production, I definitely appreciate being told up front what we're going to be getting in the video. That was something that I felt was kind of lacking in our previous react about Gen Z nostalgia, where it definitely felt like it took forever to get to the point of the video, and honestly, at the end of it, I didn't really feel like we ever did get to the point. But yeah, for this video, start out strong with the thesis. Yep.
In the last video, I showed what happens when you place a small portal inside a large one. You get a pocket dimension. And we did this using a curved portal surface. The whole construction was based on one portal being smaller than the other. So the surface of one part could fit inside the other.
Until I didn't notice that last comment. Do you have a favorite optical illusion? You don't, but you're curious to know. Okay, well, actually, one thing that when I was like reading up on a little while back, that I found pretty interesting are these so-called form constants. I think is what they're. Yeah. Let me see. Yep. Form. Yep. You might have seen these if you ever look up at like the sky on like a clear blue day. And you can kind of see these patterns in your eyeballs. They're very interesting because they're basically how our brain kind of like translates visual data into like things that our mind can like perceive and whatnot. So I don't know. Very interesting. I mean, to put a name to that sort of thing that I would see at the end of school when I get picked up by my parents and just looking up at the sky, looking at the little. I mean, for me, it was kind of like a combination of like the cobwebs and spirals. Just watching that.
This raises a question. Is it possible to pull off the same trick when both portals are the same size? Because when you enlarge the small portal, its surface will also enlarge and eventually it won't fit and everything will break. It is possible, and here's what it looks like. And now we get a fair infinite space. But how does it work? So, there are two concepts for calculating portal-through-portal teleportation. The first is teleportation degrees, where we create copies of the portal and filter their parts. I explained this in detail in this video. The second way involves creating a clever teleportation surface that never intersects the portal, and we don't have to teleport anything or create copies. The issue is that first method works great in almost all cases, but breaks when we try to place a small portal in a large one. The second method works for a small portal in a large one, but it's very limited. It's unclear how to program these surfaces to work in the general case. So next, I will explain how I improved the first approach with teleportation degrees so it works for a small portal in a large one too. But before I get to that, I want to say that for surface approaches, I will use two-sided portals, because that's their natural state. And for teleportation degree approaches, I will always use one-sided portals, because it's easier to program and it gives you less visual noise. You can imagine it's actually a two-sided portal that just has its back covered. Let's recall how the teleportation degrees approach works. First, we take two coordinate systems that will define our portals, and then place these portals at these locations. If we send one portal into another, then nothing happens when they intersect, because we didn't yet program any behavior. We can see there is an extra part behind the orange portal that technically entered the portal and should be teleported. Actually, if you think about it, we never need anything behind the orange.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, guys. This is perhaps a little over my head. Never have been a math person, so some of this is, I mean, this is very interesting, but I'm not really. I mean, well, while I'm following, I'm not sure if I'm understanding. But yeah, we'll see. I'll continue through the video. Yeah.
Orange portal. So for all future parts, I will write code to remove them when they go behind the orange part. So we have our first break above the portal. It can be fixed if we continue the blue part here. To do this, we teleport the coordinate system of the entering portal from the orange portal to the blue portal and get a new coordinate system. I call this the second teleportation degree. We can place a new portal on it. Here we see this new part looks okay, but we need to remove the back part behind the blue portal. We remove it and now everything works. We move further and have a break again. To get a new teleportation degree, we need to teleport the second teleportation degree from the orange portal to the blue one, and we get the third teleportation degree. Then we do the same operations. Add a new teleportation degree and filter it. So the algorithm is that when the portal image breaks, you need to add a new teleportation degree. And with this approach, you can add them infinitely. Only those that do something useful will be visible. I want to say that this teleportation degree approach works perfectly as long as our portals are the same size and as long as they don't intersect boundaries. No matter how hard I tried to place a portal inside itself without hitting a wall, I couldn't do it. By the way, in the last video I said I created all teleportation degrees manually, but now they are generated automatically and there can be as many as needed. Now let's look at small portal entering a large one. And this is where it breaks. And the problem is that new teleportation degrees won't help here, because all these teleportation degrees are behind the orange portal and they all get filtered and disabled. This is exactly where I gave up in the past, because I couldn't imagine that it was possible to fix. But now we
Yeah, I
have
can see why.
hemispherical portals which can give us a clue to the solution. My plan was to take screenshots at the same camera angles and figure out what's happening and how to program it. And here's what I understood. First, a new type of break happens when this small blue part enters its larger version, and it enters completely, not partially. Also, before, portals were exclusively outside and didn't create a new space. But now, with these hemispherical portals, we get something like a separate space. So if we want to simulate this with flat portals, we have no choice but to program a separate space with a black background at this new break location. So the new break becomes a portal to a black pocket dimension with only this one part visible. Okay, so what should be in this space? When I looked at the screenshots, I realized all the teleportation degrees of the entered part should be there. Okay, I implemented this, and let's compare the images with the hemispherical situation. Some portals are missing. I increased the number of rendered teleportation degrees, but nothing appeared. And here you can see we need teleportation degrees in the reverse direction. Or in other words, we need negative teleportation degrees. Previously, I teleported the blue portal from the orange portal to the blue portal and got new teleportation degrees. And these were portals that could be seen through the blue portal. But what about portals visible through the orange portal? What?
All right. Well, I will say why. I can't follow this as well as I was the previous video. It's definitely very visually interesting. I mean, love the Hall of Mirror effects you get there. Yeah.
Portal. But what about portals visible through the orange portal? What if we teleport the orange portal through the blue portal? Then we get different portals, and these are the ones that go in the reverse direction and fit this situation. After adding them, the new approach starts working identically to hemispherical portals. Before, negative teleportation degrees weren't needed because the blue portal was teleported by the orange one. But here, two teleportations happened at once. Blue teleports orange and orange teleports blue simultaneously. Look, this small part enters its larger version, but you could also say that part of the large one enters the small one too. And on the outside, there are only positive teleportation degrees, while the pocket dimension has all the teleportation degrees from minus infinity to plus infinity. Now
Tilling
we
as you're
have
heading
a
out.
working
Right.
approach, and we are not limited
And
by
thanks for
any
stopping by.
surfaces
See
and
y'all.
don't need
See you
to
next time.
program
Yeah.
them, expand them, and so on. And of course, we can make a normal-sized portal inside, and it works. We fly inside and see that nothing intersects with anything. Everything looks correct. We can revolve around however we want, and the portals go in this infinite line.
Kind of getting reminded of Diavolo from Golden Wind. But yeah.
You might be wondering how I am able to figure out such things. The
Yes.
secret sauce is this visual scene editor, where I can add an object or portal and then play with them to get immediate feedback on what works and what doesn't. And this is a good way to solve problems and understand the topic. This is
Sure.
why I am happy to introduce you to this video's sponsor, Brilliant.
Anyway,
Brilliant helps you become a better thinker
let's
and
ethical
problem
react,
solver
people.
with thousands of visual,
let me-
interactive lessons in math, science, programming, data analysis, and AI. To develop the skills for building visualizations like mine, I highly recommend their courses on vectors and programming. The latter will help you think like a programmer and get familiar with Python to start programming right away. What I love about Brilliant is that it focuses on problem solving. And I've always believed that this is the best way to build real understanding. Plus, their mobile app lets you learn at any time and any place. Except maybe for the pocket dimension.
Yeah.
Use
say that
Brilliant
again.
just a few minutes a day to sharpen your problem solving skills.
Damn, I mean, I'm a programmer and I'm not exactly following along this too well, but granted, I already mentioned I was never a great mathematician, so that's probably why. I mean, maybe I could take some brilliant courses and become a little more familiar with these sorts of dimensional manipulations. But yeah.
To get started, go to brilliant.org/aptozorax. You can also click the link in the description or simply scan this QR code. By doing so, you'll get a 30-day free trial plus a 20% discount on the annual subscription. Thank you, Brilliant, for sponsoring, and now back to the portals. Let's experiment with this framework. Let's take this object and enlarge it forward until it collides with something. We see it can enlarge infinitely and doesn't intersect with anything. We fly in, and inside we see a huge space without end. That's why it's so dark here. So we can say that real infinite space is created here. And this isn't the same as in the previous video, when scaling portal can fit infinite space in a finite volume. Now let's place a small portal inside. Fly in here and try to scale it up to normal size. This works continuously and it seems like we can continue further. We do it and it surprisingly works. It turns out with this approach we can place a large portal in a small one too. A completely counterintuitive result that actually works. And this looks symmetrical to the process of placing a small portal in a large one. Next, let's just look at a beautiful picture. Let's take this combination of large and small portals. When we place one in the other, we see how many teleportation degrees come out of the blue portal in the shape of a shell. And this is what it looks like from the pocket dimension. We get an infinite logarithmic spiral. By the way, that little spiral of white spheres represents the camera. Now let's gradually change the scale to normal. We get an infinite vertical spiral, a very beautiful and massive structure. And let's also look at this animation of how the portal scale changes from large to normal and vice versa.
Speaking of those form constants I mentioned earlier, I mean, this definitely reminded me of the kinds of, I guess, visual hallucinations that people have when they're on, mushrooms and other sorts of psychedelic drugs. Definitely, it makes sense because those hallucinations are brought on by sort of lowering our perceptual filter beneath low enough we can sort of see or experience the basically mathematical operations and manipulations our brain is doing on our visual and then also like other sensory input, but it's definitely most interesting for us visual creatures. The hallucinations are definitely most interesting when they're the visual kind. This definitely reminds me of some of that. Not as they're not moving as much, but certainly the patternistic quality of it going off into infinity is definitely very reminiscent of that.
Thanks to no restrictions on the teleportation surface, we can play around here and get lost in it for hours. As a reminder, you can visit my web demo and play with this yourself. Add this link in the description. And how will an object look in such space? We place it and it looks normal. The cube just goes along a straight line. But inside, the cube also repeats from minus infinite teleportation degree to plus infinite. Here space is looped in such a way that one object looks like many objects. Now I want to show what's forbidden to do with portals. Let's move the small portal to a face-to-face position. And then inside we scale the portal to normal size. We fly inside and see an infinite line of portals. But what if we rotate it? We see the line turns into a circle that infinitely intersects itself. This configuration is invalid because at some point the distant teleportation degrees start intersecting the backs of existing portals. And all infinite teleportation degrees lie in one finite circle. And if they had any thickness, they couldn't fit here. That's probably why this is an invalid configuration. Before, with the portal in portal configuration, we were only limited by portal boundary intersections. But now in this pocket dimension, there are more complex restrictions that I can't formulate yet. And now about teleportation surfaces. As I said, there are two approaches: teleportation degrees and special shapes of teleportation surfaces. I generalized teleportation degrees to a pocket dimension, where a normal-sized portal works. But how to do the same with teleportation surfaces? I thought about it for a long time and found a solution. Let's look at following 2D animation. We have a small portal and we place it in a large one. To make this work, we need to bend the surfaces so they don't intersect. Next, we've inserted it and want to scale it up. We scale it and the surfaces need to scale accordingly. And if you do this in a clever way, the surfaces will turn into infinitely extended parallel lines. This is the solution to how to represent a normal-sized portal as a teleportation surface. And this animation was suggested by several users in my Discord server. So
Nice,
here
not
are
bad.
two normal-sized
Kind of reminds me a little of sound waves propagating, or just waves in general.
in my Discord server. So here are two normal-sized portals with an infinite surface beyond the portal. If we rotate around these portals, we teleport to their outer side, and it looks like there's nothing between them. The portals are parallel, so their planes are also parallel and don't intersect. With flight teleportation, you can see the black pocket dimension. If we fly inside, we see the familiar line of portals. And if we turn off light teleportation, we can see how the entire pocket dimension simply lies between two planes. This explains why there's real infinite space, why an infinite rod can fit here. It borrows an infinite piece of space from the originally infinite Euclidean space. But what is that strange white line? We turn off light teleportation and see that this line is at the boundary where the two infinite portal planes converge. Actually, this happens because the ray teleports indefinitely between these boundaries. And due to limited floating point precision in computers, at one point the error becomes larger than the distance between these infinite planes, and the ray escapes beyond the surface. So it's just a rendering artifact, nothing more. But such negative surface works well when our portals are parallel. But what if we want to rotate one portal, for example like this? Then the portal surfaces will intersect and it won't work. But we can orient planes in such a way that they become parallel again. And as you may notice, I also use sphere pieces around the portal to maintain surface continuity. And the picture inside looks familiar. But here the rendering artifact is much larger. The next scene is this spiral inside the pocket dimension. And outside it's represented by these parallel planes. But how to find the plane tilt angle?
Man, so much of this looks very cool, even though I can't really add much to it. Yeah, it's really cool, and a potential Portal sequel would be crazy if it utilized these anti-portals. Would I mean, the game already throws people for a loop as is, but like, this would be another level of mindfuckery. I would be very interested to see that.
For different portal rotations. When portals are parallel, the plane normals are also parallel. Then, when we rotate the portal, the plane normals stop being parallel. And then, when we reach the right tilt angle, the normals become parallel again. So we need to find such a normal vector that is parallel to its version after teleportation. Let's write this mathematically. The next part is for people who had linear algebra in college. Don't worry if you don't understand, it's not very...
Yeah, I did linear algebra in college, and it was not a fun time, let me say. And so the only reason I passed was because of COVID. Zoom classes made it really easy to look up the answers online. But yeah,
very important. As I said, portals consist of two coordinate systems, and each coordinate system can be written as such coordinate transformation matrix. Then teleportation of a normal vector can be written like this. First, we transform the vector to local coordinates of the orange portal, and then transform them from the coordinates of the blue portal. And after all this, the normal should equal to itself. Looks familiar. If we put brackets around the matrices, this becomes an eigenvector of this matrix. And this is the first time in my life when eigenvectors were useful to me.
I mean, true. Yes, that is a familiar and relatable feeling. That was the eigenvectors were always the part of linear algebra that really screwed me over, even after retaking it multiple times and starting to let some of it sink in. The eigenvectors were always like, how how do I use this?
It turns out that this eigenvector of the teleportation matrix is the normal vector, which can then be used to calculate the portal surface. Next, I want to show how such negative portal looks like in my space curvature simulation program from the last video. Quick update, previously there were holes here, but I've now fixed them and the surface became continuous. So this is a negative portal scene. Here a green square moves outside this portal, a blue square moves in a circle in the pocket dimension, and the red one moves in both spaces. The top and bottom go to infinity. We run the simulation and it converges to this shape. On it we have a regular plane and a separate cylinder, and both are connected by portal tunnel. So when we are inside the pocket dimension, we are here in a separate cylinder, and it's no wonder why rays loop and it looks so dark. And the regular space outside is here when the green square moves. So the pocket dimension is really a separate entity that's connected to the regular world by a small portal tunnel. And
Fascinating.
finally, the question that's probably been bothering this whole time. Is it possible to place a normal-sized portal inside itself without shrinking it in such a way that it forms infinite space? Because before, I always first shrunk it, then inserted it, then scaled it back up. Yes, it is possible, but if your portal has an infinite surface. For example, this portal has an angle shape, and its other part goes infinitely down left. You can just move the portal down, and to the left, it will fit since it's infinite, just like in Hilbert's hotel. There's the pocket dimension. Okay, but what if the portal has a finite boundary? The problem is that no matter how much I tried different positions of portal in portal, I couldn't find one where I could insert it. I even made this interface where you can change the surface, add, remove pieces in different places. But I still couldn't find that position. But maybe subportals, which I proposed in this video, will come to our rescue. Look, when a portal enters another, it gets stuck here. What if we place a new portal here that will prevent this collision? Let's try. So there's this subportal. Here its entrance and there's its exit. We move the portal exactly the same way and now it doesn't get stuck. It can move further. We move more and look, now we are limited by this place. The blue portal will hit the boundary of the subportal, but it is in such position that now we can move the subportal through the blue portal. It can
This is
continue moving the large
crazy.
portal.
I mean,
And this is
this,
the
this is basically just, anyone who's played with those physical puzzles. I mean, this is basically that, but just taken to the like nth degree, to the infinite degree.
maximum I've reached. I don't know how to proceed further, too many variables appear. So friends, I actually don't know if this is possible or not, but it was worth giving it a shot. And now I want to try to answer the same question from a topology perspective. Topologically, an infinite 2D plane is equivalent to a sphere with one punctured point. I think this is somehow related to the stereographic projection, and a regular portal is equivalent to a plane with one hole. So a regular portal is equivalent to a torus with a punctured point. Next, a cylinder is equivalent to a sphere without 2 points. And a negative portal is a plane connected to a cylinder. So it is equivalent to a sphere with 3 punctured points. So if we compare a regular portal and a negative portal with a pocket dimension, they are topologically not equivalent to each other. And since regular portal movements should preserve topological space equivalence, this can probably serve as a proof of why one portal can't be placed in another without shrinking. But I'm still not sure about this, since scaling should also preserve topological space equivalence, but somehow it breaks everything. And now the answer to one of the most frequently asked questions from the last video. What if you place an object in the pocket dimension and then pull it out? So there's an object here and a face-to-face portal. We fly in here and move the portal inside itself to create a pocket dimension. Now we can move the object inside. You can see it's fully inside the pocket dimension, beyond the portals. Next, we pull out the portal and see that the object also came out. So the object can't actually get lost in the pocket dimension. It just might become smaller if you push it too far. And it works very simply. I represent the portal as this teleportation surface. Place the portal inside, then place the object inside, and when I pull out the portal, the object stays in the same place. But due to the axiom about surface irrelevance, we can claim that the object is actually here, where we can see it. By the way, initially this video was much more complex. For example, I considered infinite
Bruh, much more complex than this is terrifying.
cons instead of planes. I wanted to talk about their complex constructions and properties. But user RareBeef in my Discord suggested using planes, and this simplified the explanation a lot. Also, instead of the topological proof, I originally thought to justify this through the impossibility of a pocket dimension in spherical geometry, but also decided to remove this part as unnecessary when I came up with the idea that a negative portal can be made in my space curvature program. It's a shame that sometimes this happens. You make a scene, write a script, program animations, and then it doesn't get used. And I wanted to thank all the brilliant people from my Discord server. Your ideas shaped this video a lot. As you can see, these videos take a lot of effort to produce. So if you'd like to support my work, you can join my Patreon. That's all. Thanks for watching.
Whew, good lord. Hey, I said it'd be interesting to have a portal game utilizing these anti-portals, but based on what we just witnessed, I think it would probably fry 99% of the population's brain. Like, can you imagine certain Let's Players trying to play this game? It'd be impossible. But yeah, that was Optozorax's anti-portal. Very very interesting, despite my mathematical illiteracy. But yeah. Okay, it's 11:30 here, so okay, yeah, that should work.
A particle accelerator.
All right, so we are looking at how did alchemy work with Esoterica as a big Full Metal Alchemist head. You know, always interested in hearing a little more about, I guess the background of alchemy. But yeah.
A particle accelerator at CERN recently achieved the dream of the alchemists. They transmuted lead into gold, firing lead atoms at one another and just so slightly missing. These interactions created a high
Pulling up
energy
my
pulse,
notes.
and that pulse caused 3 protons to be ejected from some of the lead atoms, thus creating gold. Of course, the energy required was very costly. They only produced about 29 trillionths of a gram of gold, and it vanished in a fraction of a second. But hey, counts, right? Of course, nuclear transmutation had already been achieved. 1941 saw mercury, and then 1980 saw both bismuth transmuted into gold. But tales of the transmutation of base metals into gold and silver are as old as alchemy itself. But given that chemical transmutation is now known to be impossible, what exactly was going on in the labs and in the crucibles of those hermetically sealed vessels? Let's explore the possibilities and discover how real historical alchemy might have worked.
Make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica for weekly explorations of topics in esoteric history. And if you'd like to support the work of providing evidence-backed, free, and accessible content on topics like these, I'd hope you consider checking out my Patreon or some of the cool merch we have on the channel, some of which is alchemy themed. If you're new to the study of esotericism and you want to get the lay of the land with reliable information, make sure to check out my study guide. And if you're interested in historical books, actual historical books on topics in the occult and the mystical, check out our bookstore over at Esoterica Rare Occult Books. You can find all of those links over in the description and in the pinned comment below. But now let's step back into the labs of those ancient alchemists and discover what might have been going on in these tales of transmutation. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
We're off to a great start.
One of the most ancient goals of alchemy was the transformation of one substance, specifically a base metal like lead or tin, into a noble substance, a metal like silver or gold. And this began all the way back at the origin of alchemy with Greco-Egyptian alchemists who were able to carefully control the tinging or coloring of metals, giving them a silver, gold, red, or other color luster. The reasoning went that if they could transform the surface of these metals, then there must be some process by which they could transform the metal all the way through, transmutation of one metal to another. And some of our earliest alchemical recipes describe such practical and theoretical processes. Now, I've done a whole video on Greco-Egyptian alchemy, and along with the most famous of those alchemists, Zosimos of Panopolis, if you want to check that out. But the most important theoretical shift in alchemical history happened in the Abbasid Caliphate in Iraq, where the school of Jabir ibn Hayyan developed what is called the mercury-sulfur theory of the metals. Building on Aristotle's more ancient theory that the metals were formed by gaseous exhalations deep within the earth, these ingenious Arabic alchemists argued that those exhalations were actually composed of two specific substances, mercury and sulfur, the ratio of which when fused became the various metals as we know them. Thus, it should be theoretically possible, they reasoned, to decompose any metal into their basic sulfur and mercury components and by art or artifice recompose them into other metals. And this theory also has straightforward empirical confirmation as well. The most common form of lead to occur in nature is the mineral galena, which I have some right here, or lead sulfide. But to extract the elemental lead, one need only basically roast that galena in a common hearth fire. What would have been obvious to the experimental alchemist would have been the smell. As it heats up, it gives off the telltale odor of sulfur. Galena is sulfide, lead sulfide after all, with the liquid lead looking very much like mercury before being quenched in water and thus fixed, to use the alchemical language, as lead. And keep in mind, galena, that's going to matter a lot in just a moment. But despite developing a range of new technologies and techniques, including a range of furnaces, labware, and chemical processes such as sublimation and distillation, along with a range of powerful novel chemicals such as acids, the alchemists were never able to produce more gold or silver than originally went into their crucibles. Of course, we now know this is a law of conservation, but they didn't. And many honest alchemists, such as the occultist Cornelius Agrippa, actually admitted as much. They could never seem to produce more gold and silver than went into the hermetically sealed crucibles. And the reason for this is just now known. Chemical transmutation is simply impossible. Now, I know what some of you are thinking out there. That's because they were never trying to transform metals at all. Alchemy was always really about spiritual or inner psychological transformation. And while this is admittedly a very lovely idea and a wonderful modern interpretation of alchemy,
And that is pretty much Full Metal Alchemist in a nutshell. But yeah, definitely. So far, it's only interesting seeing how pre-modern understandings of the world, despite being ultimately, incorrect, according to science, were very, rigorously defined and like, I don't know, thought through systems. I mean, it reminds me a lot of the video we just watched about anti-portals, which, I mean, those are things, as far as we know, do not exist in the real world yet. In the world of computer graphical representation, we can do all these incredibly interesting and complicated mathematical manipulations and whatnot. And I mean, honestly, it's making me think it'd be very, very interesting to have an alchemy themed game that basically runs on the rules of alchemy. Which, I mean, I'm sure something like that probably does exist, but let me know, I guess.
Alchemy, it's not at all historically accurate. The concept of spiritual or psychological alchemy, as most people know it, was primarily developed in the 19th and 20th centuries by occultists
Carl
like
Jung.
Mary Ann Atwood or the psychoanalyst and genius Carl Jung. Now, if you're interested in the history of actual spiritual alchemy, especially its European origins among late 17th century mystical heterodox Protestants, check out my ongoing series on just that topic. But suffice to say, historical alchemy was in fact concerned with actually transforming metals with the famed Philosopher's Stone, but also developing a range of other technologies like life-extending medicines and solvents, including the most famous solvent of all, the alkahest, the universal solvent, which had the attendant problem of, if it's a universal solvent, what exactly do you store it in? But
Right.
despite the impossibility of chemical transmutation, dozens of such transmutation tales abound in alchemical literature. Some texts even provide detailed to a point, instructions for the production of the famed Philosopher's Stone, which is said to have had the power to do that very transmutation. And I say detailed up to a point because even the most sober alchemical texts, which describe alchemical procedures, some of which, by the way, are so clear that modern forensic chemists like the pioneering scholars Newman and Principe have actually recreated historical alchemical procedures in modern labs. But even those most detailed protocols inevitably become as vague as they are grandiose, such that basically there's kind of a bit of hand waving and a miracle happens and gold or silver is seemingly appearing in the crucible and then is multiplied in volume. Now, if you're interested in the topic of the Philosopher's Stone itself, you can also, again, check out my deep dive on that topic as well, along with a pretty big playlist I have on topics in alchemy here on the channel. But what gives? If chemical transmutation is in fact impossible, and it is, and yet we have not only transmutation tales, but literal surviving artifacts said to have been made of alchemical gold, what was actually going on in the labs and the crucibles of the alchemists? And speaking of alchemical crucibles, this is an alchemical crucible sitting here on the set of Esoterica. Part of that might be to unravel that mystery, might be actually getting these 17th century alchemical Hessian crucibles tested. These are in fact known, as I said, Hessian crucibles, and they're nested together. And I'm hoping to get this one tested to see what's actually in here and what was the alchemist doing when they were working on this. So stay tuned for that. Should I be touching this and putting it so close to my face with all the
No, probably not.
this over here. But awaiting that, let's explore some possibilities behind what have been going on in these tales of transmutation. The first possibility is perhaps the most human: fraud. Alchemical fraud is attested at the very beginning of alchemy. Zosimus, the Egyptian alchemist, complains about frauds in his day and was an enduring problem through the entire history of the great Hermetic art of alchemy. In fact, early modern monarchs and aristocrats even had wonderfully...
Man, definitely. Whoever put together this illustration must have had a bone to pick with alchemists. Literally depicting them as monkeys at typewriters before, presumably before the invention of typewriters.
And was an enduring problem through the entire history of the great Hermetic art of alchemy. In fact, early modern monarchs and aristocrats even had wonderfully horrible methods of punishment for alchemical frauds. And perhaps the most famous case of fraud was that of Georg Hanauer, who promised Duke Friedrich of Württemberg that he would produce for him 25 metric centners of gold from iron. Now, the Duke was a bit wary of such a grandiose claim, and therefore he carefully sequestered the alchemist in his lab for this transmutation trial run. Do a little first to prove you can do it, and then you can have all 25 centners. But he didn't actually search the lab as carefully as he should have, because Honauer's child apprentice was actually hiding in a box in the lab. And during the transmutation trial run, he snuck out of the chest and put a bit of gold into the hermetically sealed vessel. Hermetically sealed. And of course, the Duke eventually found out about this, and for his trouble, Honauer was strung up on a gibbet made of 25 metric centners of iron covered in gold leaf, a lesson for the, alchemical betrugers, the alchemical frauds out there. But I really do
Bro, they
appreciate
did not
this
play
kind
back
of
then.
early modern poetic justice, literally being strung up on the very iron you were meant to transmute, falsely covered in gold leaf. It's really an art form all itself, medieval torture. All right, aside from fraud, many of the most common transmutation tales involve taking a pre-existing metallic substance and often through the application of some transmutation element like that mysterious red powder that Edward Kelly was said to have had to reduce the volume of that substance such that a precious metal remains or a transmuting compound is produced which can be used to make more gold or silver later on. This transmutation via reduction probably has its origins in the process that we now know as cupellation, whereby a volume of ore is superheated such that some of it vaporizes, leaving behind heavier metals, specifically gold and silver. Now, recall that ore, galena, that I have here? That's iron sulfide that I mentioned a moment ago. Well, galena also contains often a little bit of silver along with the lead that it is. Essayists and alchemists had discovered that with very
You say iron sulfide?
that I mentioned a moment ago, or galena that I have here, that's iron sulfide that I mentioned a moment ago.
Caught a bit of an error there.
Contains often a little bit of silver along with the lead that it is. Essayists and alchemists had discovered that with very powerful custom-built furnaces, you could melt the lead, but also eventually vaporize the lead using those furnaces, and it would leave behind, in some cases, a small bead of silver, seeming.
I'm sure the resulting lead vapors were very, very healthy and good for the body of these alchemists and their minds.
Transmuting the lead into silver. Well, you're halfway there. There must be a way of making it into gold. Another famous process actually involved using silver coins, specifically Brabant thalers, along with various sands as a kind of flux, such that the silver could be poured off, leaving behind a small bead of pure gold. Now, of course, we now know that Brabant thalers are actually known to contain a very small amount of gold, and some examples, which I have a few, actually contain a small amount of gold, and there's even a bit of a yellow sheen to them in the right light. And such processes using a range of metals, including lead and copper, are well documented by luminary alchemists such as Libavius and Sendivogius. But if not by reduction, another way to produce noble metals was through fusing those metals with other substances to create more of the precious metals in that process. This is a process the alchemists typically refer to as multiplication. Such processes are actually known as far back as ancient Egyptian texts like the Leiden and Stockholm papyri, among our earliest alchemical manuscripts known. Now, this typically involved taking some amount of pure gold or silver and then infusing the metal with additional substances. Often copper and zinc are in the case of gold, or tin and arsenic in the case of silver, often along with a substrate of liquid mercury in various forms. Now, the problem here should be relatively obvious. The increase in the apparent volume of the precious metals comes at the cost of their debasement. And if we investigate some of the few remaining examples of the alchemical gold produced in the early modern period, that's exactly what we find. Yes, some alchemical gold has survived down to this day. The famed medallion produced by the alchemist Winslow Saylor, actually produced for Leopold I, was produced from apparently transmuting silver into gold by dipping the medallion in a mysterious transmutation liquid. Studying the medallion in the 20th century, we discovered that it's composed primarily of about 48% gold, 43% silver, about 7.9% copper, along with traces of tin, zinc, and iron. Now, what was that mysterious transmutation liquid? It was probably diluted nitric acid, which attacked every other chemical in the medallion except for the gold, thus leaving behind an apparent solid gold medallion, sufficient to pass at least some of the classic methods of precious metal assay. So this one's a little alchemy and a little fraud.
Right.
So, fun. Another process for producing precious metals through the process of what the alchemists called cementation, whereby layers of metals were joined together, often compiled into strips before being fused together through a process which transformed the bundle into an alleged precious metal. Described by Centovogius and many other alchemists, thin layers of gold would be carefully layered over other metals and then heated to fuse them, often with special alchemical salts or other transmutation substances put into there with the precious metal. Now, this process was rather interesting for technical reasons at least, and in that precise temperature control was often required, such that the metals wouldn't totally fuse, becoming an obvious alloy. Rather, the silver or gold surface had to be fused by heat welding without totally melting it into an alloy. Now, of course, this could be easily detected simply by cutting into the alchemical gold or silver, something we find essayists doing. However, another process involving lead sheets fused with silver creating gold was also known. But the presence of the gold in the alchemical process was actually, again, probably just through cupellation. You would fuse it at a high temperature and it would leave behind a bit of gold or silver. But again, this is actually the process of cupellation that I just described a moment ago, often with those secret alchemical transmutation elements often acting as salts, which basically formed a flux by which the gold or silver could run out. Further, various metals could also be tinged or colored using precious metals as a kind of plating. In fact, this tinging or coloring of metals in ancient Egypt using a device known as the karatakis was actually the foundation of Western alchemy itself. Thus, many such procedures are known through the history of alchemy. And in most cases, gold was attacked with acids and mercury along with other substances so as to produce a kind of gold amalgam, which could then be applied.
I was not aware that there's apparently an issue of our day where like people basically take tungsten ingots and then like gold plate them. Yeah. Interesting.
To the surface of something like silver, which was then heated and washed, leaving behind a gold layer, thus transmuting the silver. For what it's worth, the process of dissolving gold or making potable gold explains some of the most powerful imagery that you may recognize from the history of alchemy. The dissolving of gold, often with a bit of copper impurity and aqua regia, or concentrated nitric acid and hydrochloric acid in about a 1:3 ratio, produces a very distinct green hue before a dramatic red color appears. And the ability of aqua regia to attack gold was captured in the famous image of the green lion eating the sun with the blood pouring out. Further, the famed philosopher's stone and other transmutation elements like Edward Kelly's famed powder was often depicted as being bright red, the very color of gold so dissolved. And you can check out a great many videos on YouTube where this process is actually performed using fuming nitric acid or aqua regia from people recovering gold from, say, old electronic components. These people are the alchemists of our days. Various protocols also exist in the history of alchemy for producing metals with the appearance of gold or silver from non-precious metals. And again, many of these recipes go all the way back to the very dawn of alchemy itself. Gold could be produced from iron pyrite, rightly called fool's gold, fused with copper and polished. Silver was often produced with a combination of lead, tin, and mercury by various means. The preparation of brass was also associated with production of gold, often through various admixtures, specifically involving sulfur and mercury, unsurprisingly knowing how alchemy theoretically worked in the mind of the alchemists. In fact, one such procedure involved the distillation of cinnabar for producing liquid mercury, cinnabar, which also produced things like sulfuric acid, which in turn was distilled with alum and sal ammoniac, which actually produced aqua regia, the very substance that they would need to attack gold. Thus, in the process of creating such tinging techniques, especially with the use of mercury, etc., many of these became the backbone of industrial chemistry. So they didn't transmute gold or silver, but they did produce the foundations of chemical modernity. And that's a point that shouldn't be missed. Part of the danger of the idea that it was just all spiritual leads one into a kind of historical blind alley. If all of what the alchemists were doing was psychological or spiritual, how in the world did modern chemistry emerge at all? And barring alchemists actually working in their labs to do these sadly impossible transmutations, these secondary technologies and productions and techniques could have never been produced, and thus chemistry would just have had to have emerged out of whole cloth in the late 18th century, a notion that clearly makes no sense. Now, of course, did the alchemists think of what they were doing as spiritual in some sense? Well, of course they did, because they were living in an extremely Christian area, and almost every craft and every trade was imbued with both religious and spiritual mythology and symbolism. But we shouldn't confuse symbolism and metaphor for what they were really doing, which was laboratory work. Of course, as I mentioned, historical texts of alchemy often begin to border on the fantastical as they approach the production of the philosopher's stone or the generation of gold and silver, and this will sometimes involve bizarre substances like dried basilisk, don't look at that, or just, directly invoking divine agency to aid with the transmutation in the case of people like John Rupesisha. Regardless, what I think is crucially important in appreciating the work of the alchemist is not in denigrating their lack of possible success in transmutation, nor romanticizing, spiritualizing, or otherwise psychologizing their efforts, but in deeply understanding how they understood their work and how they went about their work, how they understood nature and attempted to transform it, thus becoming the shoulders upon which the genius of modern chemistry in fact stands, and the genius of modern interpretations of alchemy as fundamentally spiritual or otherwise psychological. While transmutation had to wait for high-energy nuclear chemistry to fulfill the dreams of the alchemists, we can still marvel at their deep commitment to innovation, experimentalism, daring, and their awe of nature. Traits I think are just good for any modern person or scientist. Now, I have lots of content here on the channel on the history of alchemy if you want to check those out. I've also included a historically reliable book list on alchemy in the description if you want to check out those for a much deeper dive on the actual historical realities of alchemy. As many of you know, alchemy was my first esoteric love, so there's going to be a lot more content like this on alchemy in the future. Until then, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, religion, and apparently science.
All right. Lovely video. Definitely would recommend checking this guy out. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna be looking through his filmography, looking for more content from him. But yeah, some of the notes I guess I pulled out or wrote down, I guess, while looking at this. I mean, definitely found it interesting how the alchemists of the past would they would use these sort of natural processes like the distillation process as proof for the success of alchemy. It was a little reminiscent of how conspiracy theorists and other similar I guess like quote unquote internally consistent thought processes continually sort of prove themselves no matter what no matter what evidence is thrown their way. But ultimately it is like Mr. Esoterica said, these sort of branches of natural philosophy were what eventually gave way to science. It's a little ahistorical and kind of arrogant to treat these I guess ancient peoples like they were just dullard who were too dumb to figure out. Well, I mean, like, part of the reason we even know what we know is because of the efforts these people, made. You describe that middle way of not trying to do perennialism with them, where it's like, oh, they're they were all this, like I said, not psychologizing their efforts, but not also belittling them either, just recognizing them for what they were, just humans trying to understand shit, same as there ever was. But yeah, but speaking of his first esoteric love, it sort of reminded me, of mine, which were pretty much cryptids, Mothman, Jersey Devil type stuff. Loved that stuff as a kid, even though it scared the hell out of me. Or maybe it's more accurate to say I loved it because it scared the hell out of me. But I think that's it for the notes here. So I'll leave it there. Well, yeah, that's 3 videos down once again. I think I added some more stuff since last time. Yeah. Added like the vast ancient cities of prehistoric Europe from Dan Davis history. From Dan Davis history, we reacted to on Monday. Yeah, we can. I guess you can look forward to that in like several months from now. As well as some other stuff from like Zenless Zone, Zero's Endgame, and how phosphorus started the camping explosion. That's, I mean, I guess since this is a collaborative YouTube playlist, and that means you can like vote videos up. If you're interested in if any of these videos like tickle your fancy, you can maybe vote them up so it'll be even higher. And I'm definitely looking forward to that autism and anime. Yeah, like neurodivergence and anime video. But yeah, a little bit of an engagement bait, I guess, there at the end. But yeah. With that, I'll just say, thank you for watching as always. So consider liking, commenting, perhaps even subscribing. But yeah, until then, I will be seeing you all next time. I didn't realize let me add the display source. I'll get that fixed for next time.